The morning alarm echoed through the metal halls of Kepler Station. Marcus Chen rolled out of his narrow bunk and stretched his arms above his head. Outside his small window, stars dotted the black space around the station. He had been living here for 6 months now, but the view still amazed him. Marcus was 22 years old and the only human at the Galactic Military Academy. When Earth joined the galactic community 3 years ago, they were allowed to send one student to the famous academy. Marcus was that student. His father had been a soldier, and his grandfather before him. Fighting was in his blood. The academy was huge. It floated in space between 3 star systems, and students came from all over the galaxy to learn here. The hallways were wide to fit all the different alien body types. Some students were tall and thin like walking trees. Others were short and covered in hard shells. A few looked almost human but had strange colors or extra arms. Marcus grabbed his gear bag and headed to the dining hall. The bag was heavy because of what he kept inside. His classmates often asked him about it, but he just smiled and said it was personal equipment. They probably thought it was some kind of human technology they had never seen before. In the dining hall, Marcus got his breakfast from the food machine. It was designed to feed dozens of different species, so it was not very tasty for humans. He sat at a table by himself as usual. The other students were friendly enough, but they did not really understand humans yet. Earth was so new to space travel that most aliens thought humans were primitive. At the next table, 3 Chitanari students clicked and buzzed at each other. They looked like giant praying mantises with 4 arms each. Their homeworld was famous for producing the best space pilots in the galaxy. They had been flying between stars for over 10,000 years. Near the window, an Etherian student sat alone. Her people were tall and graceful, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow. Etherians could speak directly into other minds without using words. They had built a peaceful empire across 50 star systems. The Etherian student, Lyrelai, sometimes tried to speak to Marcus with her mind, but human brains were too different. It never worked. At the largest table sat Vorthak students. They were huge, each one weighing as much as 3 humans. Their bodies were covered in thick gray skin and they had tiny black eyes. Vorthaks were natural engineers and builders. They had constructed most of the galaxy's space stations and artificial worlds. Marcus finished eating and walked to his first class of the day. The hallways were busy with students heading to different lessons. Some studied space navigation, others learned about alien cultures or advanced technology. Marcus was in the combat program, which was considered the hardest course at the academy. The combat classroom was large and circular, with seats arranged in rising rows. At the center was an open space where students could practice fighting techniques. Weapon racks lined the walls, holding training versions of guns and energy weapons from dozens of different worlds. Instructor Zekthor stood at the front of the class. He was a Krillian, which meant he was tall and thin with 4 arms and 4 eyes. His skin was dark purple and sharp spines ran down his back. Krillians had been the galaxy's greatest military leaders for thousands of years. They had won more wars than any other species. Today we will practice close combat without advanced weapons, Zekthor announced in his deep voice. This means no energy guns, no plasma rifles, and no projectile weapons. You must use only basic melee weapons. Marcus nodded along with the other students. This was a common exercise at the academy. The idea was to learn fighting skills that would work even if your main weapons stopped working. Most species had practiced this kind of combat before they developed space travel. The instructor continued, "In real battle, your energy weapons might fail. The enemy might use jammers to stop your targeting systems. A good warrior must be ready to fight with simple tools." One by one, students began pulling weapons from their gear bags. The Chitanari student named Zixkar pulled out a vibroblade. It looked like a metal stick, but when he turned it on, it hummed with energy and glowed blue. The blade could cut through most materials by vibrating millions of times per second. Lyrelai, the Etherian, produced what looked like a crystal staff. It was a neural disruptor, designed to work with her natural psychic abilities. She could use it to confuse enemies or make them forget what they were doing. The Vorthak students had heavy weapons that matched their large size. One pulled out a gravity hammer that could make objects heavier or lighter. Another had metal claws that extended from a device on his arm. Other students showed similar weapons. All of them were advanced technology that could do things normal metal weapons could not do. They had targeting computers, energy fields, or special materials that made them much better than old-fashioned swords or spears. Marcus looked around the room and realized something. Every other student had weapons that were hundreds or thousands of years more advanced than anything humans used. Earth had only been in space for a few decades, while some of these species had been building starships since before human civilization existed. But Marcus was not worried. He reached into his gear bag and pulled out his weapon. The entire classroom fell silent. In his hands was a crossbow. It was made of dark wood and metal, with scratches and wear marks that showed its age. The wood was smooth from years of handling, and the metal parts had been carefully maintained and oiled. It looked like something from a museum, not a weapon for military training. Several students started making the sounds their species made when they were amused. The Chitinari clicked their mandibles rapidly. The Etherians made musical notes. The Vorthax rumbled deep in their chests. Instructor Zekthor's 4 eyes focused on Marcus and his weapon. "Cadet Chen," he said slowly, "that appears to be a projectile weapon, a very old one." Marcus stood up and held the crossbow across his chest. "Actually, sir, this is a mechanical tension device. It does not use gunpowder or chemical propellants. It just uses physics, storing energy in bent materials and releasing it to throw a bolt." He ran his hand along the wooden stock. "This crossbow was made on Earth about 1,000 years ago. It belonged to my great-great-grandfather. He carried it during the wars we called the Crusades." The laughter in the room grew louder. Lyrelei spoke up, her voice like wind chimes. "You cannot be serious. That primitive device cannot compete with modern weapons. My neural lance can disrupt brain functions from 30 meters away." Marcus looked at her and smiled. "Ma'am, humans have been trying to kill each other efficiently for our entire history. We have had a lot of practice." The simple statement made the laughter stop. There was something in Marcus's voice that made the other students uncomfortable. It was not a threat, but it was a reminder. While their species had been building peaceful civilizations and advanced technology, humans had been fighting wars on their own planet for thousands of years. Instructor Zekthor studied Marcus carefully. "Very well, Cadet Chen, we will see how your historical weapon performs against modern training targets." Marcus began loading a bolt into the crossbow. His movements were smooth and practiced, showing that he had done this thousands of times before. The bolt was simple steel with feathers at the back end, but it was perfectly straight and sharp. "The targets are designed to test accuracy, speed, and tactical thinking," Zekthor explained. "Modern weapons make this course relatively easy because they have automatic targeting and smart ammunition." Marcus pulled the crossbow string back until it locked in place. The weapon was now ready to fire. He looked around at his classmates and their glowing, humming high-tech weapons. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the old ways work just fine." Instructor Zekthor led the class to the Academy's main training room. It was a massive space with high ceilings and walls that could change to create different training environments. Today, the room looked like a battlefield with barriers, walls, and obstacles scattered throughout. Marcus carried his crossbow at his side, while the other students held their advanced weapons. He could feel their eyes on him and his ancient weapon. Some students whispered to each other in their own languages, probably discussing how amusing it would be to watch him fail. The Chitinari student Zixkar clicked his mandibles and spoke in broken galactic standard. "Human Marcus, you make mistake bringing old weapon. My vibroblade cuts through steel like paper. Your stick with string cannot compete." Marcus checked his crossbow one more time, making sure the string was tight and the bolt was seated properly. "We will see," he said simply. Lyrelei floated closer to Marcus. Etherians did not really walk like other species. They seemed to glide just above the ground. "I do not wish to embarrass you," she said in her musical voice. "Perhaps you should use a training weapon instead. The Academy has many options designed for beginners." Marcus shook his head. "Thank you, but I will stick with what I know." A Vorthax student named Thrag stomped over. His heavy footsteps made the floor vibrate. "Tiny human, your weapon is older than my grandmother. My gravity hammer can crush bones from 10 meters away. You cannot win with museum piece." Marcus looked up at the massive alien. Even sitting down, Thrag would be taller than Marcus standing up. "Your grandmother must be very young then," Marcus replied. "This crossbow has won battles for over 1,000 years." Instructor Zekthor called for attention. "The exercise will test 3 important combat skills. First, accuracy at different ranges. Second, speed of target acquisition. Third, tactical thinking under pressure." He pointed to different areas of the training room. "You will move through 5 stations. Each station has different challenges. Some targets are stationary, others move. Some are protected by barriers, others are hidden. You must complete all 5 stations as quickly as possible while hitting every target. Marcus studied the course layout. His crossbow had no computer to help him aim, no targeting system to track moving objects, and no smart ammunition that could change direction in flight. He would have to rely entirely on his own skill and training. The other students seemed confident. Their weapons could do most of the work for them. Vibro blades could extend their reach with energy fields. Neural disruptors could affect targets through walls. Gravity hammers could hit multiple targets at once. Even the simplest alien weapons had some kind of technological advantage. The modern way of fighting relies on technology to make up for lack of skill, Zekthor continued. But what happens when that technology fails? What happens when you face an enemy your computers do not understand? Marcus smiled at that. He had heard his grandfather tell stories about the old days on Earth, when soldiers learned to fight without depending on their equipment. A weapon is only as good as the person using it, his grandfather used to say. Zixkar went first. The Chitinari moved through the course quickly, his forearms allowing him to climb obstacles easily. His vibroblade cut through barriers and struck targets with precision. The weapon's energy field could reach farther than the physical blade, making it easy to hit targets that seemed out of range. He completed the course in 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Lorelei went next. She moved like a dancer, her neural disruptor staff glowing as she used her psychic abilities. She could sense targets through walls and around corners, striking them with mental attacks before they even came into view. Her time was 2 minutes and 15 seconds. Thrag was slower because of his size, but his gravity hammer was devastating. He could hit multiple targets at once by affecting the gravity around them. Barriers meant nothing when he could make them too heavy to stand or too light to provide cover. His time was 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Several other students completed the course with similar results. All of them relied heavily on their weapons' special abilities. Their targeting computers helped them aim. Their smart weapons adjusted for wind and distance, and their energy fields gave them advantages that simple projectile weapons could not match. Finally, it was Marcus's turn. He stepped up to the starting line with his crossbow ready. The first target was 50 meters away behind a partial barrier. Most of the other students had simply shot through or around the barrier using their advanced weapons. Marcus studied the target for a moment, then aimed at what looked like empty air to the left of the barrier. He pulled the trigger. The bolt flew out and struck the metal barrier at an angle, bouncing off and hitting the target dead center. Several students made surprised sounds. Ricochets were not something their smart weapons usually needed to calculate. "How did you know the angle?" asked a student from a species Marcus did not recognize. "Practice," Marcus replied, loading another bolt. "When you cannot shoot through walls, you learn to shoot around them." The second station had multiple moving targets at different distances. The other students had simply let their weapons track and fire automatically. Marcus watched the targets for several seconds, studying their patterns. Then he began firing. Instead of aiming at where the targets were, he aimed at where they would be. Each bolt struck its target exactly as it moved into the projectile's path. He hit all 6 targets with 6 shots, never missing. "Impossible," breathed Thrag. "The calculations required." "Not calculations," Marcus said. "Instinct. Hunters on Earth learned to do this thousands of years ago when hunting animals." At the third station, targets appeared and disappeared randomly from behind cover. Advanced weapons could track them and fire the instant they appeared. Marcus had to do something different. He waited patiently, crossbow ready but not aimed at any particular spot. When a target popped up, he was already moving, swinging the weapon around and firing in one smooth motion. His reaction time was actually faster than some of the automated systems. The fourth station was the hardest yet. Targets were hidden in shadows and behind partial cover, requiring careful observation to find them. Marcus moved slowly through this section, using his knowledge of angles and light to spot targets the others might have missed. "You are taking too long," called out Zixkar. "My vibroblade sensors would have found all targets already." Marcus did not hurry. He found each target carefully and took precise shots. Every bolt hit exactly where he intended. The final station was a single target that moved in an unpredictable pattern while protected by an energy shield. The shield was designed to deflect most weapons. but it rotated and had small gaps that opened and closed randomly. The other students had used brute force to overcome the shield, more powerful weapons, multiple shots, or special ammunition. Marcus watched the target for a full minute, studying the shield's rotation pattern and the target's movement. Then he smiled. It was not the confident grin he had worn earlier, but something more dangerous, something that reminded everyone watching that humans were predators. He raised the crossbow, tracked the target for a moment, and fired. The bolt slipped through a gap in the shield at the exact moment the target moved into its path. The target exploded in sparks and smoke. The training room fell completely silent. Marcus slung his crossbow across his back and walked back to the group. His time was 4 minutes and 30 seconds, slower than most of the others. But he had hit every single target with perfect accuracy. More importantly, he had done it using only skill, patience, and understanding of his weapon. No computers, no targeting assistants, no smart ammunition. Just a human and a 1,000-year-old crossbow. Instructor Zekthor looked at Marcus with new respect. Explain to me, Cadet Chen, how a primitive weapon performed so well against targets designed for modern warfare. Marcus checked his crossbow one more time before answering. Sir, advanced weapons make shooting easier, but they also make shooters lazy. When your weapon does the thinking for you, you stop learning to think for yourself. He gestured toward the destroyed targets. This crossbow forces me to understand everything about each shot. Wind, distance, angles, timing, target behavior. Every bolt requires complete knowledge of the situation. The other students gathered around, their earlier amusement replaced by curiosity and respect. But surely, said Lyrale, the advantages of modern weapons are worth more than such. Basic skills. Marcus looked around the group. That depends on what happens when your advanced technology fails, or when you face an enemy who does not fight the way your weapons expect them to fight. He paused, letting that sink in. How many of you have trained to fight without your weapon's computer systems? The silence that followed gave him his answer. These aliens were not just curious about his weapon, they were curious about a different way of thinking about combat. 3 weeks after the demonstration, Marcus found himself running unofficial training sessions every evening. What had started as a few curious students had grown into a group of 30 aliens from 15 different species, all wanting to learn what Marcus called fundamental combat. The academy had given them permission to use one of the smaller training rooms during off hours. Marcus had set up targets and obstacles using basic materials, wood, metal, and rope instead of the high-tech equipment normally used in combat training. Tonight we will work on improvised weapons, Marcus announced to his mixed group of students. Every species here has learned to use manufactured weapons. But what happens when you have no weapon at all? Lyrale raised her hand. She had become one of Marcus's most dedicated students, practicing with a training crossbow every day. But surely any military situation would provide proper weapons. Marcus smiled and walked over to a table covered with random objects. A metal pipe, a length of rope, a handful of bolts, some electronic components, and various tools. In perfect conditions, yes, but combat is never perfect. He picked up the metal pipe and tested its weight and balance. This becomes a club or a spear. The rope becomes a snare or a climbing aid. These bolts can be thrown like darts or used to jam machinery. He gestured to the other objects. Everything here can be a weapon if you understand how to use it. Zixkar, the Kitanari student, clicked his mandibles skeptically. Human Marcus, these are just random objects. They cannot compare to real weapons. Let me show you something, Marcus replied. He took the rope and tied one end around a bolt, creating a simple sling. Then he picked up a small metal nut from the table and placed it in the rope pocket. With a quick spinning motion, Marcus launched the nut across the room. It struck a target 50 feet away with enough force to dent the metal. This weapon design is over 4,000 years old on Earth. It can kill large animals or break armor. The students stared at the simple rope and bolt combination. Most of their species had developed energy weapons so early in their history that they had never needed to create such basic tools. The principle is simple, Marcus continued. You extend your arm with a flexible lever, then release at the right moment to transfer energy to the projectile. Physics does not care if your weapon is made of advanced materials or plain rope. Thrag, the massive Vorthak, rumbled his confusion. But why learn such primitive techniques? My people build gravity weapons that can crush enemies from great distances. Marcus nodded respectfully. And those are excellent weapons, Thrag. But what if you face an enemy that can disrupt gravity fields? What if your power source fails? What if you need to fight in a place where your weapon would cause too much collateral damage? He set down the improvised sling and picked up the metal pipe again. This pipe cannot be hacked, jammed, or turned off. It works in any environment and never runs out of ammunition. It is not better than your gravity hammer, but it is always available. Over the following weeks, Marcus taught his students how to see potential weapons in everyday objects. A maintenance tool could become a mace. A data pad could be thrown like a discus or used as a shield. Even a pen could be deadly if used correctly. But more importantly, he was teaching them to think differently about combat itself. Most alien military training focused on using advanced equipment, according to predetermined tactics. Marcus taught adaptability and improvisation. Your species think of combat as a technical problem to be solved with the right equipment, he explained during one session. Humans think of it as a puzzle where you use whatever you have to achieve your goal. The results were remarkable. Students who had been perfectly competent with their standard weapons became much more creative and flexible fighters. They started noticing tactical opportunities they had missed before and finding solutions to problems that would have stumped them previously. Word of the training sessions reached the Academy's senior staff. Instructor Zekthor visited one evening to observe a session where Marcus was teaching knife fighting techniques using training blades. The key is not the blade itself, Marcus was explaining to a group of students holding basic metal knives. The key is understanding distance, timing, and leverage. These principles work whether your blade is a simple knife or an energy sword. He demonstrated basic techniques: how to control distance, how to use angles to avoid attacks, how to turn an opponent's strength against them. The movements were simple but effective, refined by thousands of years of human warfare. Interesting, Zekthor commented afterward. You are teaching them to fight like humans fought before they had advanced technology. Not exactly, Marcus replied. I am teaching them to think like humans think about fighting. We never stopped being creative about violence even after we developed better weapons. Zekthor's four eyes studied Marcus carefully. And you believe this makes better warriors? I believe it makes more complete warriors. A soldier who only knows how to operate advanced equipment is really just a technician. A warrior who understands the fundamentals can adapt to any situation. The conversation was interrupted by an alarm klaxon echoing through the station. Both Marcus and Zekthor looked up in surprise. This was not a scheduled drill. All students report to emergency stations, came an announcement over the station's communication system. This is not a drill. Hostile ships have been detected approaching the Academy. Marcus and Zekthor quickly made their way to the command center, along with students and instructors from throughout the station. The main display showed 3 ships approaching at high speed, their design unfamiliar to most observers. Coraxian raiders, identified one of the senior instructors. They must have discovered the Academy's location. Admiral Thexra, the station commander, turned to address the assembled group. The raiders are jamming our communications so we cannot call for help. Our defensive systems are designed for training, not real combat. All students and non-essential personnel should evacuate to the emergency shelters. Most of the students began moving toward the evacuation routes, but Marcus stepped forward. Admiral, what about the advanced students? We have been training for combat situations. The Admiral, an elderly Nexari whose crystal body had taken on a dark blue color with stress, shook her head. This is not a training exercise, Cadet Chen. These are real pirates with real weapons. Academy training does not prepare students for actual combat. Respectfully, sir, Marcus replied. That depends on what kind of training they have received. Before the Admiral could respond, the station shook as the first enemy weapon struck the outer defenses. The lights flickered, and emergency lighting activated throughout the command center. Shields at 60%, reported a technician. They are using some kind of adaptive weapon that learns our defensive patterns. Marcus felt a familiar sensation, the calm focus that came over him in dangerous situations. His grandfather had called it combat clarity, the ability to think clearly when violence was imminent. Admiral, he said quietly, my students have been learning to adapt when their normal tactics do not work. This might be exactly the kind of situation where that training would be useful. Zekthor stepped up beside Marcus. I can vouch for the quality of Cadet Chen's training program. His students have learned to think creatively about combat problems. The station shook again, harder this time. Warning lights flashed as more systems came under attack. "Shields at 40%, the technician called out. "At this rate, they will breach the hull in 15 minutes. Admiral Thexra looked around the command center. Her senior staff was focused on damage control and defensive measures, but the Raiders' adaptive weapons were neutralizing their standard tactics. The Academy's defenses had been designed to repel normal attacks, not weapons that learned and adapted in real time. "What exactly are you proposing, Cadet Chen?" she asked. Marcus quickly explained his idea. The Raiders were using advanced tactics and adaptive technology, which meant they would be prepared for conventional responses. But they probably would not expect primitive tactics and improvised weapons. They will have countermeasures for energy weapons, jammers for targeting computers, and shields designed to stop modern projectiles, he said. But I doubt they have prepared for crossbow bolts and improvised explosives. The Admiral's crystal body flickered with uncertainty. "You want to fight space pirates with medieval weapons?" "I want to fight space pirates with unexpected weapons," Marcus corrected. "Sometimes the best high-tech solution is a low-tech approach." Another impact shook the station, and the lights went out completely for several seconds. "Shields at 20%, reported the technician when the emergency lighting came back on. Admiral Thexra looked at Marcus, then at the damage reports scrolling across her screens. The conventional defenses were failing and the evacuation routes were already compromised by hull breaches. "Very well. Cadet Chen, you and your students are authorized to implement whatever defensive measures you think will work, but I want it clearly understood. If this fails, you will have doomed everyone on this station." Marcus nodded grimly. "If the conventional defenses fail, we will all be doomed anyway. At least this way Word about Marcus and his crossbow spread quickly through the Academy. Within hours, students from different species were talking about the human who had outperformed modern weapons with ancient technology. Some were impressed, others were skeptical, and a few were annoyed that their advanced equipment had been shown up by something so primitive. The next morning, Marcus found himself surrounded by curious students in the dining hall. They peppered him with questions about his weapon and his fighting techniques. Most had never seen anything like the crossbow before. "How fast can you reload it?" asked a student from the Zephyrian species. Zephyrians looked like tall, thin birds with feathers instead of hair and bright yellow eyes. Marcus demonstrated the loading process, pulling back the string and seating a bolt. "About 6 seconds for a careful shot, maybe 4 if I am in a hurry." "Not very fast compared to energy weapons." "Then how can it be effective in real combat?" asked another student. This one was from a species Marcus had not met before, short and round with thick fur covering their entire body. "Because I do not miss," Marcus replied simply. "When every shot counts, you learn to make every shot count." Lirelei joined the conversation, her voice like gentle music. "But what if you face multiple enemies? Your weapon can only fire one projectile at a time." Marcus smiled. "Then I use tactics, movement, cover, positioning. On Earth we have a saying, it is better to be in the right place with the wrong weapon than in the wrong place with the right weapon." Instructor Zekthor approached the table. His 4 eyes studied Marcus with interest. "Cadet Chen, I have been reviewing Academy records. In 300 years of operation, no student has ever requested to use pre-spaceflight weapons in combat training." "I did not request it, sir," Marcus replied. "You said no projectile weapons. This is not a projectile weapon in the modern sense. It is a mechanical device that uses stored energy." Zekthor's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was the Krillian equivalent of a chuckle. "You found a loophole in my instructions. Very human of you." He paused. "I am scheduling additional training sessions. Other instructors want to see this demonstration for themselves." That afternoon, Marcus found himself in the Academy's largest training facility. The room was packed with instructors and advanced students from dozens of species. Word had spread through the entire station about the human with the ancient weapon. The training course was more complex than the previous day's exercise. It included moving platforms, shifting barriers, and targets that could fight back with training versions of energy weapons. It was designed to simulate real combat conditions where enemies would be shooting back. This course was designed for weapons with targeting computers and smart ammunition, announced Instructor Veltar, a senior Etherian who taught advanced combat theory. "I am curious to see how primitive technology performs under these conditions." Marcus checked his crossbow and counted his bolts. He had 20, which meant every shot would have to count. The other students and instructors would be able to fire hundreds of shots with their energy weapons. The course began with Marcus moving through a maze of barriers while training drones shot harmless energy beams at him. Getting hit by a beam would disable him for 30 seconds, simulating a real weapon hit. The drones were programmed to track movement and predict where he would go next. But the drones had been programmed to fight enemies with ranged weapons who would try to shoot back from a distance. Marcus did something unexpected. He used the crossbow like a melee weapon, swinging it to deflect energy beams while closing distance rapidly. When he got close enough, he used the crossbow stock as a club to disable the drones. "He is using the weapon incorrectly," protested a Chitinari instructor. "No," replied Zekthor. "He is using it completely. A weapon is whatever you can use it for." The second section required Marcus to hit targets while under fire from multiple directions. Energy weapons could track and engage multiple targets simultaneously, but the crossbow could only aim at one target at a time. Marcus solved this by using the environment against his attackers. He shot at structural supports, causing barriers to fall and block some firing positions. He ricocheted bolts off metal surfaces to hit targets he could not see directly. Most impressively, he used one bolt to trigger a chain reaction that disabled 3 targets at once by hitting an energy relay. "That is not how we designed the course to work," muttered Veltar. "Perhaps that is the problem," suggested Marcus as he reloaded. "You designed it for weapons that work a certain way. Real enemies might not be so predictable." The third section was the most challenging yet. Marcus had to rescue a simulated hostage while fighting through enemies that adapted to his tactics. The training computer learned from each engagement and made the enemies smarter. Marcus quickly realized that the computer was adapting to his shooting patterns, but it was not adapting to everything else he was doing. He began using the crossbow to manipulate the environment in ways the computer had not expected. He used bolts to jam doors, keeping enemies trapped while he moved to better positions. He shot out lights to create darkness that his human eyes handled better than most alien vision systems. He even used bolts as improvised tools, triggering switches and activating equipment from a distance. "The human is cheating," declared a Vorthak instructor named Grakth. "He is not fighting properly." Marcus paused in his reload to look at the massive alien. "Sir, respectfully, there is no such thing as fighting properly. There is winning and there is losing. Everything else is just rules that apply in peacetime." He completed the rescue mission by doing something none of the observers expected. Instead of fighting his way out through the enemies, he used his remaining bolts to create a distraction while he carried the hostage through a maintenance tunnel. The training computer had not been programmed to guard those passages, because energy weapons could not be used effectively in such tight spaces. "Time," called Instructor Zekthor. "Cadet Chen has completed the course." The room buzzed with conversation in dozens of languages. Some instructors were impressed, others were critical, but all of them were talking about what they had just witnessed. A senior instructor named Corwin approached Marcus. Corwin belonged to a species called the Nexari, who looked like walking crystals and were famous for their logical thinking. "Cadet Chen," Corwin said, his voice echoing strangely through his crystal body. "Your performance raises troubling questions about our training methods. Your primitive weapon succeeded where modern weapons might have failed, not because it was superior, but because you used it in ways we had not anticipated." Marcus cleaned his crossbow while he talked. "Sir, the weapon is not primitive. It is simple. There is a difference. Primitive means less evolved, less effective. Simple means fewer parts that can break." He held up the crossbow for everyone to see. "This weapon has no computer to be hacked, no energy cell to run out, no complex targeting system to malfunction. It works in any environment, requires no special ammunition, and can be repaired with basic tools. But it requires extensive training to use effectively," pointed out Veltar. "Yes," Marcus agreed. "And that training makes the user better, not just the weapon. When you depend on technology to do your thinking, you stop developing your own skills." Instructor Zekthor stepped forward. "Cadet Chen has raised an important point. Our modern weapons are undoubtedly superior in terms of power, range, and accuracy. But they have made our warriors dependent on technology that can fail." He looked around the room at his fellow instructors. "Perhaps we should consider adding some historical weapons training to our curriculum, not to replace modern equipment, but to ensure our graduates understand the fundamentals of combat. The suggestion caused an immediate debate among the instructors. Some argued that spending time on outdated weapons was wasteful. Others pointed out that understanding basic principles would make their students better warriors overall. Marcus listened to the discussion while he packed away his crossbow. He thought about his grandfather's stories of old Earth battles, where soldiers had learned to fight with whatever was available. Those warriors had not been primitive. They had been adaptable. A young Etherean student approached him. "Marcus," she said quietly, "could you teach me to use one of those weapons?" Marcus looked at her in surprise. "Why would you want to learn? Your neural abilities are far more powerful than any crossbow." She looked around nervously, then leaned closer. "Because what you said was true. My weapons require my psychic abilities to work properly. But what if I face an enemy that can block mental attacks? What if I am injured and cannot focus? I would be helpless." Marcus nodded slowly. "Learning backup skills is always smart. But I should warn you, using a crossbow effectively takes years of practice. It is not something you can master quickly." "Then I will practice for years," she replied firmly. "I would rather spend years learning something useful than remain dependent on technology that might fail me." Other students began approaching with similar requests. Word was spreading that the human was willing to teach his ancient fighting techniques to anyone interested in learning. Marcus looked around at the eager faces and realized something important was happening. The Caraxian raiders breached the station's hull in 3 places. They came through the holes wearing advanced combat suits and carrying weapons that could punch through most known armor. Their tactical computers had analyzed the Academy's defenses and prepared countermeasures for every weapon system on the station. What they had not prepared for was Marcus and his students. The first group of raiders entered through a breach near the engineering section. They expected to face Academy security forces with standard energy weapons and predictable tactics. Instead, they found Lyrelai waiting in the shadows with a crossbow and a handful of improvised explosives. The Etherean student had learned Marcus's lessons well. She did not try to fight the raiders directly. Instead, she used hit-and-run tactics, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before they could respond. Her first bolt carried a small explosive charge made from maintenance chemicals, which disabled the raiders' sensor equipment. Blind and confused, the raiders became easy targets for the other students hidden throughout the section. Zixkar used his natural climbing ability to attack from the ceiling, dropping improvised weights and sharp objects. Thrag had modified his gravity hammer to work with Marcus's tactics, using it to create unstable footing rather than direct attacks. The raiders' advanced armor could stop energy weapons and projectiles, but it had not been designed to handle crossbow bolts, loaded with corrosive maintenance acids or improvised flashbang devices made from light, fixtures, and power cells. The second breach occurred in the station's main corridor. Here, Marcus waited with a group of students armed with weapons that looked like they belonged in a museum, rather than a space station. The raiders' tactical computers could not understand what they were seeing. Primitive projectile weapons, their suit's AI reported. Threat level minimal. The AI was wrong. Marcus had taught his students to use their environment as part of their weapon system. They had rigged the corridor with tripwires connected to improvised catapults, turning the entire hallway into a giant trap. When the raiders advanced, they triggered a cascade of swinging weights, flying debris, and carefully placed obstacles. The raiders' powered armor made them strong and fast, but it also made them heavy and clumsy. They stumbled over tripwires their sensors had not detected and fell into pit traps covered with maintenance panels. Their advanced weapons were useless against enemies who attacked from directions their targeting computers had not anticipated. "This is impossible," snarled the Caraxian leader over his team's communication system. "These are Academy students with training weapons. How are they defeating full combat squads?" The answer came from the third breach point, where a mixed group of alien students had set up what Marcus called a killing field. They had turned an intersection into a maze of barriers, mirrors, and improvised projectile launchers. The raiders' energy weapons were deflected by polished metal surfaces, while crossbow bolts and thrown objects came at them from every direction. The students fought like a pack of hunters rather than individual soldiers. They communicated without electronic devices, using hand signals and vocal calls that the raiders' equipment could not intercept. They coordinated their attacks to overwhelm the raiders' ability to respond. Most importantly, They fought in ways that the Raiders' tactical computers could not predict or counter. Every time the Caraxian AI tried to adapt to their tactics, the students changed their approach completely. In the command center, Admiral Thexra watched the battle through the station's internal sensors. Her crystal body flickered with amazement as she saw her students defeating professional soldiers using improvised weapons and creative tactics. "How is this possible?" she asked Instructor Zekthor. "The Raiders have superior numbers, better equipment, and years of combat experience." Zekthor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "They have experience fighting enemies who use technology similar to their own. They have never faced enemies who think like primitive hunters." On the main display, they could see Marcus moving through the station corridors like a shadow. His crossbow had been modified with a small light and a simple scope, but it was still recognizably an ancient weapon. He used it to devastating effect, striking critical components of the Raiders' equipment and creating chaos in their formations. But the crossbow was only part of his effectiveness. Marcus moved through the station like he owned it, using maintenance tunnels and service passages that the Raiders' maps did not show. He appeared where they did not expect him, struck at their weaknesses, and vanished before they could retaliate. "Target acquired," reported one of the Raider squads. "Human male armed with primitive projectile weapon." "Eliminate him," ordered the Caraxian leader. He seems to be coordinating their resistance, but eliminating Marcus proved impossible. Every time the Raiders focused on him, they left themselves open to attacks from his students. Every time they tried to corner him, he disappeared into parts of the station they could not access with their bulky armor. The turning point came when Marcus reached the Raiders' primary objective, the Academy's main computer core. The Caraxians had planned to steal the galaxy's most advanced military training data, which would be worth a fortune on the black market. Marcus found 3 Raiders working to break through the computer core's security systems. Their electronic tools were sophisticated enough to crack most digital locks, but they had not expected to face a purely mechanical security measure. Marcus had rigged the computer core entrance with what his grandfather would have called a Rube Goldberg machine, a complex arrangement of weights, pulleys, and tripwires that created a devastating trap without using any electronic components. When the Raiders triggered it, they found themselves caught in a web of steel cables while improvised projectiles struck them from multiple angles. "Security breach at computer core," the Raider leader received the frantic report. 3 men down, unknown mechanical trap. Mechanical? The leader's voice carried disbelief. "You mean like gears and springs?" "Affirmative. Our sensors cannot analyze it because it has no electronic components." The Raider leader realized he was facing something outside his experience. His advanced weapons and tactical computers were useless against enemies who fought like their ancestors had fought thousands of years ago. "All squads, fall back to the ships," he ordered. "We are aborting this mission." But falling back proved as difficult as advancing had been. The students had learned Marcus's lessons about controlling the battlefield. They had blocked or trapped most of the obvious escape routes, forcing the Raiders to move through areas where improvised weapons and creative tactics were most effective. By the time the surviving Raiders reached their ships, they had lost more than half their equipment and a third of their personnel to an enemy that should have been helpless against them. As the Raider ships retreated, Marcus stood in the command center with his crossbow slung across his back. Around him, his students tended to minor injuries and cleaned their improvised weapons. The station was damaged but secure, and everyone was alive. Admiral Thexra approached Marcus, her crystal body now glowing with a warm golden light that indicated deep respect. "Cadet Chen, I owe you an apology. Your training methods saved this station and everyone on it." Marcus nodded tiredly. "Thank you, Admiral, but the credit belongs to all the students who were willing to learn something new." Instructor Zekthor joined them, his 4 eyes bright with interest. "This battle will be studied for years to come. Professional soldiers defeated by Academy students using primitive weapons and improvised tactics." "Not primitive," Marcus corrected gently. "Simple. There is a difference." In the weeks that followed, word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy. Military academies and defense forces began requesting information about Marcus's training methods. The crossbow became a symbol not of primitive technology, but of the importance of understanding fundamental principles. Marcus found himself promoted to instructor status and given permission to develop a formal curriculum around what the Academy, now called Adaptive Combat Theory. Students from dozens of species signed up to learn how to fight effectively, regardless of their available equipment. The crossbow was eventually displayed in the Academy's museum, along with a plaque that read, "The measure of a warrior is not the sophistication of their weapons, but their ability to win with whatever they have at hand." But for Marcus, the real victory was not the defeat of the raiders or his promotion to instructor. It was the knowledge that he had taught a new generation of warriors to think for themselves, to adapt to unexpected situations, and to never underestimate the power of simple, well-understood tools in the hands of someone who truly knew how to use them. Years later, when Marcus graduated and joined the Galactic Defense Force, he carried both a standard-issue plasma rifle and his ancestral crossbow. His fellow officers learned not to question this choice, especially after the Proxima crisis, when equipment failures left an entire battalion defenseless, except for one human with a 1,000-year-old weapon and the wisdom to use it effectively. The galaxy had learned what humanity had always known. The most dangerous weapon is not the most advanced one, but the one wielded by someone who understands that every situation is a puzzle to be solved.